We up? I thought we'd do a little different look tonight. Different verse, kind of a different speed than last week. HB, you want to open that door for me? Put something there to keep the door open. Is it Ramanuji tilak you're wearing?
Yes.
Is your family from a Sri Vaishnav lineage?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Andhra or Tamil?
No, Tamil. And Andhra actually. Both actually.
You know who they're following? Tenkalai, Vadankalai?
Oh, Vanagale.
Uh-huh. Okay. Never seen you rock the tilak before.
I was in Malibu today.
Yeah, so you got to wear it, right? Yeah. Well, you know, we're Hare Krishnas, which seems like a new religious movement. Sometimes we get treated like a new religious movement. But that's not such a legitimate treatment of us. We're from a North Indian, Bengali revival movement that flourished about 5 centuries ago. On the northeastern seaboard of India. And our particular sect has, tens of millions of followers. But that revival movement, you guys know what revival movements are? Revival movements are at various points in the history of a religion. People say, hey, you guys all got it wrong. We got to get back to the basics. And here's what the basics are. The classic example of a revival movement is the Protestant Reformation of the Catholic Church that took place towards the end of the 15th century. There's basically 3 types of Christianity, major types. There is Catholicism, there's Orthodox. Most people don't know this, but there's a bunch of people who look a lot like the Catholics, hundreds of millions of them, but they're not Catholics because they split in the 10th and 11th centuries. They split from the Roman Church, and their church was based in Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. The Ottoman Empire took it over. But there's a huge church called the Orthodox Church. All the Slavs, the Greeks, the Russians, they're all Orthodox. All the Central Asian churches, they're all Orthodox. So 2 big branches, Catholic and Orthodox. And the other massive branch of Christianity is the Protestants. And the Protestants nowadays don't refer to one group, but it's every single denomination you can think of. Anglican or Pentecostal or Episcopalian is the Anglican out here, Methodist, Baptist, Evangelical, all the TV churches. It's any church you can think of. They're all Protestants because they keep Christianity but they reject the Pope. And they were part of a revival movement. Now, one man's revival movement is another woman's heresy. So it just depends on who you're talking to. If you talk to the Jews, all the Christians blew it. They misinterpreted the Hebrew Torah, and they blew it, and they fell in love with some Jew who called him Messiah when he wasn't. Jesus was a Jew. So Christianity itself is a reformation of the Jewish church. Jesus says in the Bible, my Father had 10 commandments, I only have 2. The 2 commandments are love God with your whole heart, love your neighbors yourself. That's an attempt at a revival movement. Does that make sense? You talk to the Catholics, and Martin Luther totally blew it. He was a fallen priest who married a nun and, tried to justify his program. Actually, the German language as we know it comes from Martin Luther. He put together the first common blending of high and low German that could be written, because he wanted to translate the Bible into German to rip it away from the Vatican, who forced everyone to learn Latin. And so he translated the Bible into German, but there was no written German language. And so he developed it. And he's largely credited with the modern written German, which was developed specifically so he could translate the Bible and empower everybody he preached in Germany. The Lutheran Church is from Martin Luther. It's the national church of Germany, just like the Anglican Church is the national church of England. And there's the Dutch Reformed Church, which is their major church. So all these countries with their kings broke free from the Vatican, and they stopped paying homage to the Pope. Spain didn't do that. King of Spain didn't do that. I don't think the French did that either. They kept their ties with the Catholic Church. The Orthodox, that whole Russia and all the Slavs and everything else, they'd broken, 5 centuries prior. But this happens. It's a thing. Even Jesus was a Nazarene Jew. He mentions this in the book of Acts. And so, in the New Testament, the Nazarenes were a sect of Jews. The baptism thing, that's an Essene practice. The Essenes were the bathers who would ritually bathe someone to purify them. And so the Jesus as a baptizer of others, he was baptized by John the Baptist, according to 3 of the 4 synoptic gospels. I'm losing you guys here. It's all right. If Jesus was Essene, the Essenes were a revival movement within Judaism. They said when you sacrifice the animals, you guys are aware that Judaism is a sacrificial cult, right? Even to this day, you go to a Jewish butcher, he kills the animals. The Muslims do the same thing. They kill the animals in a kosher way, or according to the rules of halal, or whatever their rules are called. And then that meat becomes blessed, and they have to say certain prayers when they're killing the animal. So the big thing that was done in Judaism was they would sacrifice animals. And at one point in the book of Hosea, in the Old Testament, Jesus said, or not Jesus, that was way before Jesus, God said, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. My belly is filled with burnt offerings and blood, and I will accept them no more. So even within Judaism, even in the Torah, there's these revival movements. Hey, that sacrifice was okay now, but it's not. It was okay then, but it's not okay now. Or the Essenes and the Nazarenes, who were both vegetarian, they said the sacrificial animal, the Essenes did, you should make an animal out of paper mache and sacrifice that, but not actually kill an animal. The Mahabharata says the same thing. We also have a sacrificial cult going on in the Vedas. And the Mahabharata said the same thing. You can make an animal out of flour and water, like out of dough, and sacrifice that into the fire instead of actually killing anything. There's a whole discussion how ahimsa, or nonviolence, is the highest sacrifice one can make. That supersedes all of the lower sacrifices where you actually kill things. So when you look at the whole idea of Christianity is Jesus himself became the sacrifice. He became the Lamb of God. It was bled. So you have to actually appreciate the sacrificial cult of Judaism to even understand what they were trying to say about Jesus. Anyway, when you look through the history of a religion, you find these revival movements, assuming a certain familiarity with Christianity. I freely avail myself of these points, assuming you'd at least be able to grab a hold of something. We, the Hare Krishna people, are the outreach branch of a 500-year-old revival movement that was part of a larger renaissance called the Bhakti Renaissance. But that Bhakti Renaissance did not occur in isolation. There was actually a preceding Bhakti Renaissance that took place maybe another 500 to 700 years earlier in South India, where his family's from. And the funky clay he's wearing on his forehead, turn around so they can all see how weird you look. That clay he's wearing on his forehead is the markings, the ritual markings of the predecessors of our tradition. There was a renaissance that took place 1,000+ years ago in South India, where people decided it doesn't matter what caste you're born into, it doesn't matter how rich or poor your family is, it doesn't matter whether you're educated or not, you're a man, woman, or child, it doesn't matter which ethnic group you belong to, which clan you belong to. In the eyes of God, everybody's the same. And we should organize society along those lines in a spiritually communist way where everybody has equal value. And God's available for the price of a song, and if you simply cry out to God, that's enough. You're required to do nothing else. They believed in one supreme Lord above all else, an omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, omniscient deity, and that love, pure love, liberation was available if you just cried out, because if you opened your heart up and you surrendered, sharanagata. If you just surrendered, prapatti was the particular language they used. If you engage in prapatti, if you threw yourself down at the feet of God, that was enough to effect your liberation. Our lineage differs from the Sri lineage because we really want to fall in love with God, and we think that God is above all things loving and sweet and kind and accessible. Whereas in South India, they had more of what would be called a classical conception of God. That God was very powerful and made you feel very small. And Thomas Aquinas, the father of Catholic theology in the 12th century, I can't remember if it was 12th century or 1200. They really mess it up by doing that, You always might be 100 years off. He said you can either kiss the feet of God, the hand of God, the feet of God like a servant, the hand of God like a subject to the king, or the lips of God like a lover. That's where the whole nun thing comes from. That they marry Christ, and therefore they forego any worldly husband. But Aquinas actually mentioned this. He was aware that there were different ways of thinking about God. And so in South India, it was very much about kissing the feet of God. In North India, it became about falling in love with and embracing God. That's where we differ. But on the basics of our theology, we took it wholesale. Like their texts, the texts of his forefathers, are quoted liberally in our texts. They were memorized and quoted across thousands of miles of the Indian subcontinent and across the better part of a millennia. We think it's like a big deal, like the U.S. Constitution, like We hardly know what people thought a couple hundred years ago. We have some scraps of things that were written. But it used to be that you would memorize the writings of your tradition. It was difficult to write things down because there's no printing press. And people would remember stuff and pass it on. And you had a living tradition that went back, almost 1,000 years. That itself was based on a tradition that was thousands of years prior to that. Keep in mind that revolution, Renaissance that took place in the 800s. Some of the Alawars were before Ramanuja, up to the 11th century when Ramanuja appeared. That Renaissance itself was saying we're a revival movement of the old Vedic culture. And you guys went off track with the old Vedic culture, and we're bringing it back. Did you guys follow that? Okay, so anyway, this fits together real nicely with what I was talking about anyway. I have a verse. This verse is very much a verse of the Bhakti Renaissance. I'm going to translate it for you guys real cleanly. It's going to be 2 verses. We're going to put them together. And then I want you guys to think about what they mean. And then I'll also be sharing my thoughts about what the verses mean. But understanding the idea of this Bhakti revolution, that was this, you don't have to buy favor with God. You don't have to buy an indulgence. You don't have to give tithe and give money. You have to build temples or big churches. You don't have to do big fancy rituals. You definitely don't have to hurt any living entity. All you need to do is open your heart and cry out. And because God's omnibenevolent, that's all he needs. And because God's omnipotent, he can do the rest. And that affects your perfection. That's really the core of bhakti. This egalitarian, colorblind, gender-blind notion about the equality of all living beings in the eyes of God, and that liberation belongs to everybody. And just in case you're totally unaware of world history, this idea is radical. Most tribal religions are like, if you don't believe what my tradition believes, you're going to hell. It's like, are you Protestant or Catholic? I'm a Protestant. Are you Baptist or another tradition? I'm Baptist. Are you Southern Baptist or Northern Baptist? I'm Southern Baptist. You're going to hell. It's like it gets real minute and pedantic. Who's in and who's out. Got so tough to sell who was saved that the Puritans, some of the original people who came to this country, they were like, look, if you're rich, you're saved. That proves that God blesses you. And that just sounds so stupid until you turn on a TV and watch people on TV today, all over cable, saying the exact same thing. I prayed to Jesus, and he gave me wealth, and that's the proof that my church is legit. All right, here are the verses. Apichet sudaracharo. Apichet, even if. Sudurachara. Even if you are the most poorly behaved person. Durachar means badly behaved. Sudurachar means especially badly behaved. Even if you behave terribly. Bhajate mam ananya bhak. Bhajate. If one worships me, ananya bhak, and is devoted to no one else. So we got a situation. The situation is that somebody is worshiping God and devoted to no one else, but then weirdly, they're poorly behaved. This, by the way, is called Antinomianism, when you think you can get away with anything because you believe the right thing. Means you can be a child molester and still be okay because you love God. But the obvious thing to say is, well, if you love God with your whole heart, then why would you be doing some awful thing? Does that make sense? Abhichet sudaracharo bhajate mam ananya bhak. Sadur eva himantavya. One should think of that person as saintly. Samyak vyavyasi tohisa. You should only think of that person as saintly because they have proper conviction and determination. Even if someone behaves abominably, if they worship Krishna and no other, and that doesn't really mean Krishna like our God versus your God. It means Vishnu, Krishna, or whatever, Yahweh. That sectarianism wasn't there in our culture. If they worship the one without a second, you should think of them as saintly. Only think of them as saintly. Because they've got the proper conviction. Kshipram bhavati dharmatma. They are a dharmatma. They're a dharmic soul. Kshipram bhavati. Quickly they become a dharmic soul. And really they become is wrong. It's really quickly they are. Bhavati is in the present tense. Quickly they are a dharmic soul. Kshipram bhavati dharmatma. Shashvat shantim nigachati. And they go to the place of everlasting peace. Kaunteya pratijanihi. Understand this. Name bhakta pranashati. My bhakta, my devotee, never perishes. Is never destroyed. Even if somebody behaves abominably, if they worship the one without deviation, you should think of them as saintly because they have proper determination. Quickly, they are a dharmic entity and they go to everlasting peace. Understand this. Krishna speaks in the imperative here. Pratijanihi in grammatically means understand. Like it's called the imperative. There's the optative, you could do this, you should do this. Then there's the imperative, you must do this. Understand is what Krishna says. He orders us, understand. My devotee, it never perishes. All right, so right off the bat, I'm disturbed by the idea that somebody could behave in abominable ways and still be considered saintly. I worry about what that's going to do to society at large. I also don't believe it. I don't believe that, you can separate one's beliefs from one's practices. A lot of our commentators over the last 1,500 years agree with me because they all are quick to comment that Krishna is being hyperbolic and any saintly person is not going to be, any saintly person is never going to behave poorly. So, but let's just for a minute not try to disembowel Krishna's words. Let's just own it. Let's just say Krishna's saying this. Again, what Krishna said literally is, even if you do the worst thing, if you are worshiping me and with no other object of devotion, you should be considered saintly. That person should be considered saintly because they're properly situated in their determination. Quickly they become righteous and they go to everlasting peace. Understand that my devotee never perishes. Let's go with that hard line reading. Or here's Prabhupada's translation. Even if one commits the most abominable action, if he's engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he's properly situated in his determination. It's a very straight translation. He quickly becomes righteous and attains lasting peace. Declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. Prabhupada taking pratijani to mean let it be known. So instead of you know this, he's saying let it be known. He's translating the verse differently. But the same thrust of the verse is there. Okay. Did you guys all follow that? All right. So I'm disturbed because we got wacky statements by our religion saying people can do all sorts of awful things and still be considered to be saintly. And so how do we troubleshoot? What do you guys have to say? Ian. Loud for me.
I think I would be disturbed if this statement was that a person becomes righteous and then does abominable things. It's the first verse discusses that a person, while they're working out this process, they may commit an abominable act, but eventually you'll become righteous. It doesn't say that you'll become righteous and still commit abominable acts.
What do you guys think of that? How many of you are confused? Don't be liars. Come on. How many of you are still confused or not satisfied with what he said? Okay. I'm confused because I thought he nailed it. Go ahead, Nick.
Didn't you say it's in the present tense? And Ian's suggesting that there's like a change that's happening.
Well, no, the verses follow one another. So even though it's in the present tense, it says quickly, which indicates that still some time is passing and one thing is changing to another. It's used in the present tense to emphasize how quickly that transformation takes place. But the verses are one verse, then another. It says he's doing this, but consider him saintly because he's got the proper determination, and that determination will act and he will become rectified. Therefore, he's seeing a chronology in the verse.
Okay, that makes sense.
Who's still confused? What do you got?
I'm still confused.
Okay, Poland, tell me why you're confused.
I just really can't understand it.
All right, let me help you. I liked what you said so much. There's a chronology, the first verse. Imagine if you have an unripe piece of fruit. Okay? Is an unripe piece of fruit edible?
Unripe?
Unripe. Do you know what the word unripe means? Not ripe. Do you know what the word ripe means? Ripe means it's finished growing and you can now eat it. Unripe is when it's not edible, it's on the tree and it doesn't taste right and it hasn't ripened with the sun and water and become flavorful and edible. How do you say that in Polish? Okay, you know that word?
Yes.
Okay.
I understand.
All right, so let's say you have an unripe piece of fruit and that piece of fruit is attached to a tree. Is that piece of fruit edible? The answer is no. Is that piece of fruit nutritious? The answer oftentimes is no. Can you eat that fruit? No. Oftentimes you'll get sick if you eat the fruit, or it might even act poisonously on your body. There are many fruits where you eat them when they're unripe. It's actually bad for your health. Is it a piece of fruit? Yes. Should you consider it a piece of fruit? Yes. If it's attached to the tree, what will happen automatically in due course of time? Is it Katie? I remember your name. I was just having fun. What will happen to that piece of fruit in due course of time?
Well, if it keeps growing, it will...
Eventually become ripe, correct? Therefore, you view it as being a piece of fruit because you know that it will ripen. Why? Because it's connected to the tree. When someone has proper conviction and determination, that will carry them through because an omnipotent deity could do the rest. Hypothetically, if God existed, hypothetically, if an omnipotent, omnibenevolent deity existed, and you really sincerely reached out, and you were really sincere, even though you were hung up and had all sorts of issues, but you were really sincere. Could that omnipotent deity help you? Yeah, because he's omnipotent, right? Would he help you? There you are. I was like, where's Madhuri? And you're not in your regular spot. Okay. All right. An omnibenevolent deity would help. And so the verse is saying, even if you're not ripe, even if you're still behaving like an idiot, if you have a proper conviction, wise people will see you as saintly. That doesn't mean they're going to leave their car unlocked with you, or their house unlocked, or let you around the women and children, or give you access to their bank account. But it means that they're going to see, oh, that person, he's going to be okay in due course of time. She's going to be okay in due course of time. Why? Because they're doing the right thing. They're connected to that process. And then, very quickly, transformation takes place. Did you guys follow that? Does that satisfy you now, Katie? Sometimes you explain something philosophically, and then you illustrate it with an analogy. And that analogy allows people to better understand what you're talking about. It makes it less remote, and it makes it more something that makes sense. By comparing it to something within your experience. Do you guys follow this? Who is still doubtful about the verse? Raise your hand. Join me in being confused. All right. I think Ian did a great job of troubleshooting the verse. I actually didn't want to talk about that. I got a whole different thing I want to talk about. Whole different angle I want to go down. Whole different line of discussion I want to initiate. But if we didn't troubleshoot the verse from the obvious initial problems, and everybody would just be thinking about that. So even if you don't want to, you got to at least get some of the basic stuff out of the way before you get into some other stuff. Does that make sense? Okay. Our commentators really run with this verse. They say that part of the proper determination is that the devotee feels great remorse about what they've done wrong. Remorse in Sanskrit is anutap. Anutap means to get cooked after the fact. You make a mistake and then afterwards you feel badly about it and you become purified. Just like if you cook gold, if you have gold mixed with other metals, alloyed gold, and you cook it at a very high temperature, do you know what happens? All the other metals melt away and become destroyed by the fire. But gold gets purified by fire. And in that fire of remorse, and literally, the Sanskrit is after fire. In that anutap, the devotee becomes purified. When devotees have properly understood what the purpose of life is, what they should be dedicating their life to, what's worth pursuing, what the proper standard is. When devotees who've understood the basics of a tradition like ours, when they make mistakes due to their weakness of heart and their addictions and vices, when those weak, immature, but sincere devotees fall away from doing the right thing, what happens? Now, by the way, all of you should immediately know the answer to this. Do you know why? Why should you know the answer to this, Yoga?
Because it's about me.
Because you are weak, immature, but sincere devotees who make mistakes and fall short of what you should be doing. We all have that feeling. We don't need to think about it or philosophize. We should be able to immediately look at our own lives and understand what happens. What happens? When you are blessed by learning about a beautiful tradition such as ours, you learn the basics of good theology, you learn how to live a good life, you have stellar examples in front of you of what that looks like. People invest time in you. And then because of your weakness and your vices and your addictions, you fall short. What naturally happens?
You feel bad for remorse.
Yeah, I feel bad about my mistakes. And the bigger my mistakes are, the more bad I feel. And that feeling, that fire of remorse, purifies you. And burns away all the unnecessary fluff until all that remains is that purified sincerity. You know, if you guys have ever, did you guys ever in school do pottery? You know, you go to school in art class and they give you clay and then you usually make a cup or something like that. Right? It's like the simplest thing to make. You make a cup. And then they normally take it out. They take it out from your classroom, and what do they do with it? Huh? Yeah, they usually don't have a kiln in your art class. So they'll usually take all those cups out and they'll fire them. And then that clay cup can hold water. If you take like just the clay of a cup and you pour water into it, it'll initially hold water, but eventually that water will seep through the clay. And eventually that water will seep through the clay. But when you fire that clay, a transformation, thanks for coming. When you fire that clay, a transformation takes place, and that cup becomes capable of holding water. That happens in the life of a devotee. We don't feel some sort of existential guilt like is so kind of common within certain branches of Christianity. Most all branches of Christianity, practically speaking. 99%. They've made like an art form of like out of an existential guilt, just for your basic existence, because Adam and Eve messed up, and you're invested with immortal sin because of the mistakes of your great-grandparents. Not like that. Just for your own stuff. And so part of the path of bhakti is learning to hold a sacred space for remorse so that it can have its curative effects on your consciousness. Remorse is this very powerful tonic that has the ability to cure you of what ails you. But it's medicinal and it has to be taken carefully under the care of a doctor appropriately. And if it is done like that, this powerful medicine has transformative effects, really cathartic, transformative effects on the self. Krishna has so much faith in us. He says, my devotee will never perish. Vishwanath, one of our saints, one of our commentators, 300 years ago, 300 some odd years ago, he wrote, well, what if somebody keeps making the same mistake over and over again? And he says, if that devotee feels awful about what he does and thinks, I'm a blemish on the society of devotees, like fie on me, then if the devotee feels like that, Krishna will even tolerate multiple mistakes. And in fact, forget like tolerating us. Krishna endorses and says, I have faith in that person. They're my devotee. They'll make it. They'll be okay. They'll make it through. Just really wrap your head around the radicalness of this conception of divinity. That Krishna bets on us, puts his faith in us, puts his faith in our innate goodness. And once we turn to him and connect with him, he has faith that our sincerity will win the day. That he endorses us. You think of that person as saintly. They'll make it through. They'll never perish. You understand? That's Krishna is speaking like this, placing his faith in us. When you make a mistake and you wrong somebody, you need to make amends. Making amends has a number of parts. Restitution has to be paid. You have to remunerate the person. You have to go and fix what you did wrong. If you stole money, you got to give it all back. Or give as much as you can back. You also have to tell them you're sorry. You also have to recount for them what you did so they'll know you know what you did. You also have to tell them what you were thinking about so they can empathize with you, even if it's that you were a massive jerk. No excuses, but just what you were thinking. Sometimes it helps them to understand. Sometimes when you explain it, they can see, oh yeah, I see it. Sometimes you look even worse when you tell them what was happening. You got to tell them what you did. You got to tell them what you were thinking. You got to say you're sorry. You got to make amends. And you got to feel remorse. Because remorse is what takes forgiveness and makes it reconciliation. Forgiveness means I let go of my bad feeling, I have a good feeling about you. Reconciliation means I trust you again. Reconciliation you got to pay for with remorse. It's the most important ingredient in an apology because it shows the person that you won't make the same mistake again. It shows that you've learned your lesson. And also you hold on to that remorse forever. So the person that you wrong can forgive you and not worry about it anymore because he knows you'll never do the same thing again because you're holding on to that remorse, and that remorse keeps you sober. Do you understand? When I wrong people, I never let go of the remorse. I forgive myself eventually, especially if they forgive me. I'll move forward. But I remember the mistake I made. I remember the lesson I learned. And I remember not to do it again. And I feel bad. I'm strong enough. Weak people can't feel remorse. We have to learn the art of holding that sacred space so we can take the tonic of remorse in a way that doesn't kill us, or degrade us, or make us depressed, or give us a little self-esteem, but in a way that actually purifies us and brings out the best in us. And when Krishna sees that remorse, that's enough for him. Because he's a person, a divine, transcendent person, but a conscious being interested in a relationship with us. And that remorse allows for a reconciliation to take place. And Krishna, even before we get it right, is willing to endorse us. As I meditate on this, I'm stunned by the beauty of this conception of divinity. I'm also humbled. And I feel a great responsibility to be a better devotee and not fail Krishna. I feel empowered. I feel responsible. I feel the weight on my shoulders. I feel sobered. I feel humbled, grateful, and really stunned. This is remorse properly conceived. Weak people can't deal with remorse. It brings up too many issues from their childhood, too many problems. It's like you have to grow up to be able to take this medicine. You see, children can't really feel remorse. It comes at a later stage of childhood development. when my daughter, like, inevitably on a regular basis whacks me in the face with a toy and, like, hurts me. And I go, ow! And I'm like, got a black eye or something. She'll start crying. I'm like, I have to, like, go comfort her. I guess if, like, I did something wrong. Because she just can't deal with. It comes as you grow older. The ability to apologize. Most people, even as adults, don't know how to apologize. It's an art and a science. And you can't fake it. If you want a reconciliation, you have to become a better person. And demonstrate that to the satisfaction of the person you're making amends with. There may be times when the bridge is too broken, too burned. Then you do your absolute best to make amends. And that just has to be enough. And you have to learn your lesson anyway. Even if the other party doesn't forgive. But with no living amends here. By just go and living your life thinking you're good enough. No, we don't do that. We actually go and apologize. If you offend a devotee, you have to go and actually, like, tell them everything you did. And then you have to spend the rest of your life glorifying them. We've made an art form and a science out of how to make amends with people. We have something to teach the world about this. And this is the core of it here. But instead of it being between two people, we're making amends with Krishna. And the amends is our sincerity and our commitment, and that's enough for Krishna. For him to endorse us, sight unseen, you know? It's like he doesn't need to count the money. He doesn't need to see the goods. It's like, oh, okay, you're my devotee? You're devoted to me? Okay, that's enough. You'll be okay. I'll endorse you. I'll put my good name on the line to endorse you. You guys feel the power of that? There's a verse. If you do the worst thing, if you're fully devoted to Krishna, in which case you wouldn't do the worst thing. But if you're fully devoted to Krishna, that's all you need. Everyone should consider you saintly. Even if they can't trust you, they should consider you saintly. And the first person to trust you is Krishna, who moves heaven and earth to help you actualize your potential. And he goes big and says, you understand this. I'm ordering you to understand this. My devotee never perishes. Na me bhakta pranashati. Pranashati means he perishes. Na, he doesn't perish. Who? Me bhakta, my devotee. This is something we have in common with the South Indian tradition. This verse, this scripture, but the sweetness of the verse is drawn out by our tradition. In the history of the world, no other tradition has drawn out the sweetness of this verse like ours has. It's the verse in a lot of ways is about grace and the salvific effect, the powerful effect, the therapeutic effect, the prophylactic effect of grace in your life. I don't think we have faith in this verse. I think if we did have faith in this verse, we would chant really sincerely. And we would let our lives be transformed. we would become vulnerable. Reconciliation means vulnerability. That's another thing everybody understands. The strength it takes to be vulnerable. To throw yourself under the bus. There's also power in that. I'm just speaking as myself instead of as us. I don't know where you guys are at, but I'm going to tell you guys where I'm at. I do have faith in this verse. I've experienced this in my life. I feel Krishna's love and faith in me every day. And I always feel remorseful and grateful as part of my daily existence. And I understand very clearly that if I do my part, Krishna will for sure do his part. And that the entirety of my dilemma is because of my lack of sincerity and unwillingness to allow Krishna to transform my life fully. I feel Krishna transform my life. I'm humbled and grateful and stunned every day. And I also feel myself resisting it. And of course, because I have free will, thereby making it impossible for Krishna to do everything he could do for me. But I'm not wondering about the truth of this verse. I know this verse is true. I know it's the truest thing in existence. And I feel like I can experience and understand very clearly that the only thing stopping me from being fully Krishna conscious is me. I open the door a little bit, and Krishna's like reaching in to give me things and help me, but I won't open the door fully. That's where I'm at with this verse. And meditating on these things, sitting with these things, creating a sacred space for remorse. How much time I got left? Making a space for remorse, learning how to use that powerful elixir, learning how to make amends in this world, but also with Krishna. Feeling Krishna's endorsement, being sobered by that, being empowered by that, being humbled by that, meditating on how beautiful Krishna is and how wonderful Krishna is. What a wonderful person Krishna is. What a wonderful friend, philosopher, and guide Krishna is. These things are the beginning of liberation. All good things come from this. Okay. Thank you for watching on IGTV.